So let me show you how you can create your own custom global animation in Squarespace 7.1 by modifying one line of code. To do this, you only need to have one of the global animations already set on the site. I would highly recommend working with either fade, slide, or scale, and avoid using clip or flex, because those last two are a little bit finickier to work with. Then, to build our own animation, we need to take 3 steps. First, we need to find the class that Squarespace is using to set the initial state of the animation. Second, we need to look at what that initial state is actually doing. And third, we need to adapt the code so that it works with the effect that we are trying to achieve. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm already working with the slide animation, and I'm going to be inspecting one of the elements that I have already seen that moves on page load. So let's go ahead and inspect this text element here. And like I said, we're going to look for the classes that Squarespace uses to apply these animations in the first place. Now, luckily for us, the way that Squarespace labels those classes is pretty straightforward. So they're kind of easy to find. You just need to look through different containers for that same element to see where those classes are actually being applied. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So here I'm standing on the H1 and I can see that there are 2 classes present. We have pre-slide and slide in, which are the classes that Squarespace uses for the slide animation to be able to set both the initial and the final state. Now, the one that we care about is the initial state, because that's the one that determines what the element is going to look like before the animation starts, so that we can see that transition from that initial point into the final one. So once we have that located, it's just a matter of looking through the right side to see what that initial state was like. So here you can see that we have that pre-slide class, and you can actually see all the elements that are being affected by it. And then we have that initial state had an opacity of 0, a transform of translate 0, 30%, and then we have the transition property that just affects the transform and the opacity. Now, of course, at the moment, these 2 things are being crossed off because then up here, we have a couple of things that are overriding that state. So the slide in animation, which is the final state, is setting that transform to translate 0, 0. And then here we have another part of the code where the slide in class is also being targeted. And then this one is modifying that opacity of 0, bringing it all the way up to opacity of 1. Once more, what we're going to focus on is this pre-slide class. Now, depending on what it is that you want to do, you may need to modify the snippet differently than the way that I'm gonna do it. So what I'm going to be doing is modifying this transform property, because apart from this translate that this property already carries, I want to also modify the rotation and the skew of the elements, which is going to give an effect that is very different from the one that we currently have. So the way that I'm going to modify this is by first targeting the class, of course. So let's go ahead and target pre-slide. And because I want to affect all elements that have that class inside my site, I'm not going to be narrowing things down. You could absolutely set this up so that it only affects a specific section or a specific block, but I'm not going to cover that right now because I want to keep things simple. So let's go ahead and go back and grab the value that this transform property is having. And the reason why I'm going to be using this in here is because if I start adding other things inside the transform property, that translate is going to be overwritten. So I'm not going to have that slide happening at the same time as my own additions. So I'm going to keep that in there. And then we're going to play around with the skew property. So let's set this one to something kind of obvious. So let's make it like 30 degrees. And then I also want to rotate this just for fun. Let's go ahead and set this up as, 45 degrees. All right. So now what this means is that the initial state of the element is going to be a little bit further down, so 30% further down from where it should be. Then it's going to be skewed 30 degrees, and it's also going to be rotated 45 degrees. So it's going to look kind of wonky at the beginning, and then you're going to see all of that going back into place because the final state of slide in, or that class of slide in that determines the final state of the animation, is making the transform change to translate 0, 0, and this is set as important. So whatever it is that I add inside my transform property is going to be automatically overwritten by the slide in class. So let's go ahead and save the changes, because otherwise it's not going to take effect. And then if I refresh this here, you're going to see that now that looks kind of weird. And then if I start scrolling down, you can see how the same pre-slide animation does the exact same thing for all of the elements that are meant to be animated. Which again, this is kind of a weird look, but you get the point, right? So with this, we can go ahead and just modify things however we want. Now, I'm not sure if I like that level of skewness, so I don't know if that's a word, but I don't know if I like that level there. So let's go ahead and keep it as 20 degrees. And then for rotation, I actually don't want the whole element to rotate like in a circle. I just want it to rotate in one of the axes. So I'm going to set this to rotate Y. And then once I have that, let's refresh the page. And then here we're going to see, oh, that looks a lot better, doesn't it? So here you can see how that is sort of like starting skewed and also kind of rotated on the y-axis, so vertically, and then it's also sliding up. So we have the combination of all of those things coming up when we're scrolling down the page. And that just creates an animation that is very different from the existing global ones. All right, and that's it. That's everything that I have for you today. I really hope that you found this trick helpful or at least a little bit entertaining. If you like this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up or leave me a comment down below. In any case, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.